There's a lot of concern, and I think understandable concern, from people who may be very supportive of Israel's right to self-defense and very supportive over the horrific massacre by the Hamas terrorists. But will still be concerned that it will be innocent people, many of them children, half the population of Gaza are under 18, who are going to be suffering as a result of the siege by Israel of Gaza, the cutting off of food and water supplies, electricity, other fuel, and of course the air strikes as well, and that it is they who are going to suffer, not the Hamas fighters who are your intended victims for that. How concerned are you that actually you're going to risk in Israel losing support of your Western allies and others if this siege continues?
Very important question, Julia. Indeed, the situation on the ground is of great concern to us. And I would say if we are operating in order to minimize civilian casualties and civilian strife, whereas Hamas are trying to exacerbate that and make the situation worse on the ground. The alternatives are very limited. There is no reality in the world where Israel will just turn the other cheek and hope that Hamas don't do it again. We have to rid this world of this terrorist organization, a terrorist government that has brutally massacred, maimed, murdered, raped, and abducted and burnt people. The situation, the paradigm has to change, and that is what Israel, through the IDF, is embarked to do. Indeed, Hamas have failed the people of Gaza miserably. Hamas is the governing authority of the Gaza Strip. They should have invested in the people. So even today, even in these days, there are so many different international organizations complaining that there isn't enough fuel for the people of Gaza. Hamas is sitting on a stockpile of 1 million liters of fuel that could help with hospitals, with water pumps, all the different types of needs. So Hamas should be taking care of the people of Gaza. We can't be expected not to protect our people because Hamas is hiding behind theirs. And indeed, we've seen over the last 3 days now, in entrance of humanitarian aid, food and water and medical supplies through Rafah, through the border with Egypt. Indeed, we are concerned that some of those supplies will actually end up in Hamas's hands. And that is something we are following, I would say, very, very closely in order to prevent if needs be.
But you know perfectly well, you know as well as I do, that the few trucks that have gone through, if it's the same number every day for the next 2 weeks, is a drop in the ocean of the need. But I completely understand and accept your point of view. Well, it is known that Hamas, lots of the stuff that goes into Gaza is actually just taken by the Hamas fighters and they use it for themselves. We know many of them living, frankly, a fairly luxurious, pleasant life compared to many of the people on the ground. The trouble is, again, so many people in the West who, again, may have been sympathetic, are going to be going increasingly concerned with, the propaganda that's coming out, people would say from both sides, where we are seeing innocent children losing their parents, being killed themselves, losing their lives. And people will say, and this is going to happen, it's happened before, it will happen again. People are going to say, this is an act of revenge, not an act of self-defense, and that it is a war crime. We've already seen those accusations. How is Israel going to defend itself against that? Or does that not really matter because for you this is existential?
Well, I think it's clear that it matters to Israel. We've seen the huge amount of international engagement the Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister have been conducting. And from the military's perspective, we're also engaging from a military to military perspective. But I think what it needs to be understood is there is a framework of international, the laws of armed conflict, where the IDF is operating out of. All of our activities are accompanied by the relevant legal authorities in order to make sure we are doing everything we can to differentiate between the civilian population and Hamas on one hand, but also make sure that our targets are indeed a military necessity, and the balance between the military necessity, the distinction and proportionality. Of course, there are going to be those in the international community that are going to point fingers, but I'd say rather than point fingers, it would be better if they could rally around this idea of changing and getting rid of Hamas. That needs to be the outcome. It needs to be the outcome for the people of Israel, but it also needs to be the outcome for the people of Gaza, who have been failed miserably by their leadership.
All right.
We can't permit reality to continue.
Let's talk also about the hostages. The number of hostages believed to be being held by Hamas has actually gone up in recent days to 222 now, from many, not just Israelis, but from many other different nationalities, many dual passport holders. We know a number of Brits among that number as well. What are your hopes of getting those people out? They'll be held in many different places. We understand many will be likely to be held underground in this maze of tunnels, hundreds of miles of tunnels underneath Gaza City. What do you think the chances are, realistically, that this ground invasion will help you get those hostages back, or will actually hinder it?
And 222 is just the latest figure, but that could indeed go up because there are still 100 people that are unaccounted for. Of course, they are at the top of our priorities, and they are definitely influencing our operational constraints, the operational planning, and the hostages are of deep concern. We have demanded that the International Committee of the Red Cross have access to them in order to see how they're doing, what are their needs, and of course we've demanded that they be released immediately. Unfortunately, Hamas think that this is a substantial bargaining chip, and I would say they are responsible for their well-being, but we have nevertheless the families of 222 people whose lives over the last 17 days have been torn to pieces. Julia, I can't really go into the operational issues regarding this really devastating problem and that we are facing. But I would say, and I'd rather not speak in depth, but their presence is influencing, and I don't want to jeopardize any efforts there is to bring them home, or operational or diplomatic.
No, I think we can understand that. Can I ask you just finally, Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner from the IDF, can we talk about Hezbollah and the threat from the north being perceived? Hezbollah very much, huge, much bigger force than Hamas is, funded very liberally by the Iranian Ayatollahs. Being threats from them, you've already got some skirmishes on the northern border of Israel with Hezbollah. We've seen actually Israeli settlers, actually moved south for their own safety. Is Israel going to be up to the task of facing a war on two fronts?
Absolutely, we'll have to be prepared, and we are reinforcing our forces on the border as we speak. And I would say, on the other hand, we're also distancing and instructed the civilians to evacuate the border communities. The town of Kiryat Shmona has been evacuated. And so over 30 different communities along the border have also been evacuated from the front lines. Even in the last hour, we've had a report of a drone coming over into Israeli airspace, and that was shot down by aerial defense. And we've had, over the last 2 weeks, increasing attacks from anti-tank guided missiles fired at our forces, as well as mortar fire, sniper fire, machine gun fire at the forces, but also against civilians. So there is concern that will spiral out of control and put more lives in jeopardy.